Have you ever wondered what does it usually mean when one categorizes a movie as way ahead of its time? We'd like to help you out there. It is either of the following things that we will be putting across. First, there is a high possibility that the film introduced us to something entirely new, which in turn pushed the very edges of the genre, thereby challenging the usual filmmaking techniques. Second, the flick did not reach out to a lot of viewers, and that could be because it didn't have the intended release, or in simpler words, the audience wasn't ready back then. That makes sense, right? Let's take horror movies as examples. Some of the most groundbreaking horror flicks were initially underappreciated, only to pick up its pace and become a cult classic eventually with a huge fan following. We can think of a horde of flicks that received negative reviews upon release, only to become masterpieces over time. Let's cut to the chase, shall we? In today's video, we will be exploring 13 of the most underappreciated horror films that were way ahead of their time. Mind you, this list is in no particular order. Stay tuned until the end of the video to see if your favorite movie made it to our list. But before we get into our explanation, we do have one very small request. If you enjoy our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Now, let's begin. The Thing, 1982, boasting a tagline that states, "The ultimate alien terror." John Carpenter's personal favorite movie is based on John W. Campbell's sci-fi horror novel titled Who Goes There? With a screenplay by the late Bill Lancaster, the film has a research team in Antarctica stumbling upon an extraterrestrial form of life, which, no points for guessing, happens to be the eponymous shape-shifting thing that can simply take over the bodies as well as the appearance of its victims. Upon realizing that the creature has the power to assimilate all life forms on Earth within just a matter of years, the research crew, bridled by both paranoia and conflict, makes up their mind to take extreme measures and not let it escape from there at the cost of their lives. Right upon its release in 1982, the flick fell prey to negative reviews and pretty harsh ones, may we add so. Well, what would you make out of reviews that have addressed The Thing as the quintessential moron movie of the 80s? Add to this wretched access, and let's not disregard instant junk. Having said that, it was the brilliant display of special effects that The Thing exhibited, which made the film ahead of its time. Rob Bottin was lauded for his incredible work. Reviewers called him the master of the macabre, stating his designs as novel, unforgettable, and colorfully horrific. The chest chomp sequence and the consequent severed head scene conclusively happen to be the movie's highest points, making it a classic that holds up to this very day. If you happen to be a fan of Ridley Scott's Alien, you're bound to make a few comparisons, but then again, Carpenter's The Thing is a bold, ingenious thrill ride capable of packing a powerful punch even after 41 years. Videodrome, 1983. Written and directed by the visionary David Cronenberg, Videodrome revolves around Max Wren, the president of a trashy TV channel, who is always on the lookout for new content that will make his channel gain more traction and viewers in the process. With Wren chancing upon a plotless TV show that has anonymous victims subjected to torture and the eventual punishment, he makes the mistake of believing it to be the future of television. As a result, Wren ends up broadcasting the show on his channel, oblivious to the fact that there is more to the graphic violence on display than meets the eye. If we dive deeper into the storyline of the movie, it is very straightforward. Videodrome is basically about people being obsessed with television. The film, which is often regarded as one of the most compelling and mind-bending sci-fi flicks of the 80s, and of course a cult classic today, unfortunately underperformed at the box office despite Cronenberg being able to get Universal Pictures to finance and distribute his movie. Let us not disregard that the particular film was made at a time when VHS and Betamax were at odds with each other for market share, so it is only fitting to say that the flick became a recipient of lukewarm reviews upon its release. However, cut to the present, the movie does look prophetic. It has a lot more relevance today, and there are no two ways about it. Academy winner Rick Baker certainly does deserve mention here for his trailblazing work on special effects. Videodrome categorically has some of the best imaginative body horrors on display. Veteran actor James Wood as this sleazy TV producer is absolutely brilliant here. His dynamic performance sells us to date. An unforgettable sequence in the film has Wood's character losing his gut inside his stomach. It is visceral, it is unsettling, and it is brilliant at the same time.
Oh, baby.
Night of the Living Dead, 1968. It was Richard Matheson's 1954 post-apocalyptic horror novel, I Am Legend, that primarily influenced both George A. Romero and John Russo to come up with Night of the Living Dead, a movie that is often regarded as the first modern zombie film. The storyline has siblings Johnny and Barbara visiting their father's grave in rural Pennsylvania when the duo suddenly gets attacked by a ghoul. While Barbara manages to get away, we cannot vouch the same for Johnny. She is seen making her way to a nearby farmhouse where she chances upon a drifter named Ben, who is able to secure the farmhouse's doors and windows. With the duo unable to determine what is happening, they discover more people hiding in the basement of the farmhouse to their complete surprise. With the undead ghouls growing in numbers and the dead emerging as reanimated corpses, the chances of survival indeed look rather bleak. While it is true that Romero's 1968 independent horror flick ultimately made it to the list of the greatest and most influential films, garnering a massive cult following in the process, this is not how things were when the movie had initially released. Back then, critics dismissed the film, referring to it as really silly, and add to this, a junk movie. The fact that Night of the Living Dead crossed every boundary with its explicit gore and emerged itself as the original gangster of zombie movies shows how it was way ahead of its time. No wonder the film spawned a successful franchise comprising 5 absolutely exhilarating sequels. Now that we're in 2023, it is still hard for us to imagine any serious horror fan out there who hasn't had the chance to witness this masterpiece yet. American Psycho, 2000. Acclaimed director Mary Herron's American Psycho is based on Bret Easton Ellis's 1991 controversial bestseller also of the same name, and co-written by both Herron and Guinevere Turner. The horror satire follows Patrick Bateman, a 27-year-old NYC investment banker working for the Wall Street financial institution Pearson Pierce, busy juggling his double life. While the day has the flamboyant, tongue-in-cheek Bateman living his American dream, the night has him spiraling into madness with an insatiable bloodlust. And add to this his illogical fantasies. American Psycho is anything but subtle, so even if the year was 2000 when the movie got released, it did hit strong, and it did hit hard, thereby polarizing both the audience as well as the critics in the process. There is no denying that Christian Bale's role in the film was considered his breakthrough performance, and if we are not wrong, this is literally what facilitated him to shift his career from supporting to leading roles in the years to come. The critical response, however, was distinctly not that great, especially while looking at the on-purpose misogyny, the subversive humor, and the graphically violent nature of the flick. Times have nearly changed, and cut to 2023, we are way more welcoming towards the movie's dark irreverence and the overall tone of the narrative. If the film had been released recently, it might have clicked a lot more with the viewers than it did 23 years back. The Shining, 1980.
I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in.
Jack Nicholson continues to haunt us with this dialogue even after 42 years, so there must be something about this movie here. One that is based on Stephen King's best-selling novel, also known as The Shining. The film has Jack Torrance, a writer and recovering alcoholic, taking up the offer as the off-season caretaker of the grand but remote hotel nestled in the Colorado Rockies and moving there with his family. But Jack's sanity eventually starts deteriorating under the influence of the hotel and its residents, which in turn puts the lives of his son and wife in mortal danger. We know what you're thinking. Does this movie really belong on this list? Well, yes indeed, because here's addressing everyone who thought that The Shining became one of the greatest horror movies overnight. No, that was never the case. Kubrick's adaptation of King's novel took its fair share of time to establish itself as one of the best horror movies. Back when the flick was released, Besides King not fancying Kubrick's work, critics too weren't that happy with the film either. Many had a problem with the slow pacing. Some stated that the movie's most startling, horrific images seemed to be both overbearing and irrelevant, and some believed that the film ended up destroying everything that made King's novel so terrifying in the first place. Wow, time surely heals all wounds. Psycho, 1960. A recipient of 4 Academy Awards nominations, Psycho is often addressed as Alfred Hitchcock's best and most famous work. But having said that, upon the film's initial release, the movie was severely criticized by British film critics. Believe us when we tell you that some literally walked out of the screening. And let's not disregard a certain someone who actually resigned her post as a film critic after watching the film. Well, given the flick's eventual popularity and box office success, it does come across as a complete shocker. Anyway, this brings us to Joseph Stefano's screenplay, which has embezzler marrying Crane on the run and putting up at a hotel for the night. However, what was meant to be a pit stop takes a dark turn, and she is brutally murdered while in the shower. The aftermath has Marion's lover, sister, and private investigator landing up at the same motel investigating her abrupt disappearance, unaware of the horrific truth. Hitchcock's chilling magnum opus might have clicked really well with the audience, but we cannot say the same in the case of the critics. Come on, it is 1960 we're talking about. But even with the aforementioned time period, Psycho still deserves commendation for displaying some of the most riveting and technically impressive camera work. As fans of this particular masterpiece, we don't think we can ever forget the infamous shower scene. It is safe to say that the movie broke several cultural impediments with its bold portrayal of both violence as well as sexuality, and we're happy that the movie ultimately made critics reassess the film. The rest, as you well know, is history. Peeping Tom, 1960. Michael Powell's Peeping Tom has been praised for many things, such as its psychological complexity, and add to this themes of child abuse, scopophilic fetishism, as well as sadomasochism. The movie, which attracted a massive cult following in the later years, and emerged itself both as a horror classic and a progenitor of the contemporary slasher film, was absolutely savaged by the press upon its release. So much so that it almost ended Powell's career as a director in the UK. With a screenplay by Leo Marks, the plotline follows a serial killer who is not only seen murdering women, but also using a portable film camera to record his victims and expressions of absolute terror, and then making a snuff film out of the footage for his own pleasure. We at Marvelous Videos firmly believe that Peeping Tom was years ahead of its time, and that this is the solitary reason which led to the downfall of the celebrated Powell as a director. Speaking of the audience back in the 60s, they were certainly not ready for Powell's masterpiece, which vividly comprised themes of voyeurism, lurid sexual content, complex psychology, and violence at its peak. In simple words, Peeping Tom failed to find an audience back in 1960, leading to critics deeming the movie as a beastly film. Shivers, 1975. With David Cronenberg making it to this list for the second time, one does have a fair idea of where we are headed. Here's addressing the Paul Hampton, Joe Silver, Barbara Steele, and Lynn Lowry starer, Shivers, a movie that is bound to take you beyond fear, beyond your wildest nightmares, and bring you face to face with terror. Cronenberg's 1975 sci-fi body horror has residents of a luxury apartment being infected by a strain of slithering parasites, which in turn possess men, women, and children, driving them into acts of unbelievable terror. When Cronenberg was making Shivers, he was still in the learning process. It is reported that the filmmaker was not even aware of film terms back then. The sole fact that he could turn Shivers into a cult classic attests to his infinite talent at that very time. Despite Cronenberg expressing grief over not having modern technology to work with, and make the high point of his movie, which happens to be the menacing slugs, look more convincing, he is more than fine with it, often addressing the flick as a product of its time and embracing it with all its flaws. You will also be surprised to know that Cronenberg has more than often held Dan O'Bannon, the screenwriter of Ridley Scott's Alien, accountable for ripping off things from his movie. The whole idea of parasites bursting out of one's body, or, say, jumping on your face, we are pretty sure it does ring a bell. Demonseed, 1977. Adapted from famed author Dean Koontz' 1973 novel, also called Demonseed, the late Donald Cammell had the iconic Julie Christie carrying the Demonseed. With a screenplay by Robert Jaffe and Roger O'Herson, the science fiction horror movie here has a scientist developing an exceedingly advanced artificial intelligence system, Proteus 4. While the scientist hopes to find solutions to the world's biggest medical concerns via Proteus 4, he fails to realize that the murderously intelligent, sensually self-programmed non-being has plans of its own and is obsessed with human beings, his wife in particular, who ends up becoming the victim of the ultimate terror. Upon the flick's initial release, critics addressed Demonseed as ponderously silly. Some even called it a dopey celebration of an obstetric abomination. Like it or not, we have an artificially intelligent supercomputer taking complete control of things and going to the extent of having the scientist's wife as a hostage inside her very home to impregnate her. It sounds ridiculous, right? But what is on display sets the mood right at the beginning, featuring in all possibility one of the greatest decapitations ever and an outstanding ending that we're pretty sure you did not see coming. It is an excellent thriller and way beyond its day if you ask us. ReAnimator, 1985. H.P. Lovecraft's classic tale of horror has Stuart Gordon weaving ReAnimator that follows Herbert West, an ambitious medical student who is fixated on the whole idea of overcoming death and thus hell-bent on proving his theory. After West's attempts to bring back his dead professor to life do not work in his favor, he enrolls himself at a different university to continue his research. West primarily starts testing his reanimating reagent on dead animals and then moves over to experimenting it on human cadavers, luring his roommate and fellow medical student Dan Kane in the process. With West and Dan exploring uncharted territories, their actions catch the interest of Dr. Carl Hill, who goes without saying has his own schemes. For those of you wondering what makes Gordon's ReAnimator such a cult film, well, it happens to be the ingenuous and effective mélange of humor and horror in just the right proportions. But having said that, the movie did not experience commercial success upon its release back in 1985. It was after the flick was released on home video, it became an indisputable horror classic. Many factors play here. We will begin with the spectacular cast of Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Campton, and Bruce Abbott, which was nothing short of a hit back then. Next comes the smooth pace of the film, which had the audience relishing every moment of the runtime and not feeling rushed. Last but not least, ReAnimator to date brags the best one-liners, and nobody can beat that yet, even by today's standards. The Mist, 2007. Frank Darabont's The Mist was conclusively way ahead of its time, featuring what is probably one of the most unanticipated and heartbreaking climaxes in film history till now. Backed by a powerful screenplay, which is also by Darabont, this science fiction horror movie is based on King's 1980 psychological horror novella, also known as The Mist. The film undoubtedly happens to be a monster movie, yet the fundamental theme has it surveying what conventional people would be forced to do in unconventional situations. The plot has a bunch of townfolk finding themselves trapped in a supermarket after a strange mist ends up not only encompassing the entire town, but also bringing along hordes of vicious, Lovecraftian monsters that are intent on savagely killing the humans. Given that The Mist was released sometime back in 2007, it still had our audience unprepared for the atmospheric nightmare. Truth be told, it is precisely how a horror movie should be. Dark, tick that yes. Intense, yes to that as well. And add to this, just the right proportion of gore to keep the viewers right on the edge of their very seats. Also, despite the legendary King validating himself that even he was genuinely scared by the movie, The Mist upon its release did have reviewers stating it as a screw-loose doomsday thriller. Ouch! That must have hurt. The Ruins, 2008. Based on Scott B. Smith's 2006 horror novel, also titled The Ruins, the flick has a leisurely Mexican vacation taking a dark turn for a pair of couples when they reluctantly join a tourist to visit the remote ruins of a Mayan temple deeper in the jungle. Unbeknownst to the group, a predatory vine growth inhabits the far-flung archaeological dig, and the group does not even have the faintest idea of the danger that they are in. For those of you expecting a fast-paced thrill ride, let us stop you right there. But let that not deter you from watching this creepy-to-the-bone psychological horror if you still have not. Believe us when we tell you The Ruins is an eerie horror tale, one that will stay with you for a while. True, it is not a masterpiece, nor does it stand amongst the greatest films of all time, but it is an underrated horror movie which, to be honest, is a breath of fresh air. It is clever, it is compelling, and it categorically is in need of a much wider audience. We highly recommend that you give this one a watch when you can. Jennifer's Body, 2009. Today, Karen Kusama's Jennifer's Body might be regarded as a feminist cult classic, but let's not disregard how severely this horror comedy was criticized upon its release. Written by Diablo Cody, this movie has the popular and beautiful high school cheerleader Jennifer becoming demonically possessed after she is offered as a virgin sacrifice to Satan. Now to survive, she has to consume human flesh, but that does not sit well with Jennifer's childhood friend, who is determined to end her killing spree. Trust us when we tell you that when Jennifer's Body hit the theaters in 2009, it was on the receiving end of reviews that said, "Watch it, forget it, move on." The movie literally struggled to find an audience upon its release. It also became a critical and commercial disappointment thanks to the misguided marketing strategy that turned this otherwise whip-smart horror comedy into some sexy slasher. We are so glad that the flick eventually found its cult fan base, one that is only growing with time. Yet to watch this horror gem here, are you? Absolutely check it out. Marvelous verdict. Well, that is all for today, and with this we finally come to the end of our video here. So what other horror films do you think were underappreciated and way ahead of their time? Also, did your favorite movie make it to our list? We would love to know your thoughts in the comments section below. Now, if you enjoy this video, then please do leave a thumbs up. Also, stay tuned with us as we promise to come back with more exciting content. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching. Have a nice one.